Okay, so the 1050 Ti is a solid buy if you're purchasing a brand new graphics card right now, as it's still around its MSRP of $140 US, give or take a few bucks. And yes, I know this MSI Gaming X variant is on the more expensive side, but don't worry, as the performance will be very similar to even the cheaper models that you see here, as of course they're using the same GPU. Then comes the CPU that you need to pair it with, and today we're going to dive deep into the benchmarks and see how the 1050 Ti pairs with the Pentium G4560. By now you guys already know that I love this little processor as it's so damn cheap, and it can handle 60 FPS gaming with relative ease. Now, before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the room, which is Ryzen 3. Looking at current pricing, the G4560 was initially priced at $55 US, but has slowly crept its way up to around $80. Currently, it sits at around $70, which I believe is still great value, but with AMD's R3 1200 priced just $40 more at $110, most of you might be considering jumping onto Team Red. Unfortunately, I'm not part of AMD's product notification squad just yet, but I will be taking a look at the R3 1200 next week and seeing if it's worth your money over Intel's Pentium and i3 lineup. In a good week, you can pick up both the G4560 and the 1050 Ti for just over $200. And with these two devices, you can assemble a pretty cheap system which can handle 1080p gaming at 60 FPS between medium and ultra settings. I mean, check this little system out. You get a decent chipset to work with, 500 watt power supply for some upgradability in the future, as well as 1TB of storage and a case that doesn't look half bad. I'll leave a link in the description to the parts list if you guys want to check this one out. So without further ado, let's see what we're working with here. The rest of the test system features 16GB of RAM clocked at 2666 MHz and a Z170 motherboard. Do note that the 1050 Ti that I'm using here is overclocked with an additional 150 MHz on the GPU clock and an additional 700 MHz on the memory, and this is something that I'd seriously recommend in this price bracket, seeing as you could easily be gaining 5 to 10 FPS with an easy overclock. Check out the video in the top right hand corner if you'd like to learn how you can do that if you're not familiar with overclocking. Before we get into the benchmark numbers, let's see if there's any stuttering during our gameplay, and if the Pentium processor holds back the 1050 Ti from being fully utilized. Starting off with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and I'm pleased to say that the experience here was fairly pleasant. Here you're looking at 1080p at medium settings with no visual stuttering or significant frame rate drops. Looking at some of our info on the right hand side of the screen, we have both the CPU and GPU utilization, with the 1050 Ti pretty much at 100% the entire time. Sure, the G4560 does approach the 100% utilization mark and hence creates a bottleneck sometimes, but not during actual gameplay. The only time I did notice stuttering and FPS drops were when I was waiting in the lobby with 90 other people, but honestly even my overclocked 7700K stutters there. During actual gameplay though, it's more enough to pop off a few kills and even win a game or two. What about higher frame rate games then? Well, here's Overwatch pushing close to 100 FPS on average at 1080p ultra settings, and the G4560 is holding its own here with no visible stuttering or frame rate crashing. The Pentium did get close to 100% utilization though, and of course, we'd still get some positive scaling in FPS by stepping up to an i5 or R5, even though we're not severely bottlenecking the 1050 Ti here. GPU and CPU utilization in GTA 5 was really the only area in my testing where I did see the G4560 significantly hold back the 1050 Ti. This is mostly due to the fact that the CPU, in addition to sending draw calls to the GPU, has to handle a lot of decision making for the NPCs in the environment. Watch here as the G4560 maintains 100% usage and the 1050 Ti is severely underutilized, sinking as low as 80% usage. Honestly though, if I didn't have the OSD displayed with these values, I don't think it would bother you too much, and I really mean that. I didn't notice any stuttering or immersion breaking frame rate drops, but I'm not going to excuse the fact that the 1050 Ti is indeed being held back a bit here, just giving you guys my opinion on how much you'll actually notice it. Now let's get into the benchmarks and look at the results. Kicking it off again with PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and here we are seeing an average of 60 FPS. This included about 10 minutes of gameplay, including looting houses, running in fields, driving vehicles, and of course fighting off other opponents. Frame rates do slow down a little though, with the lowest 1% and 0.1% of frames quite far behind that average of 60. Still though, for a $70 CPU and $140 graphics card, I definitely enjoyed my time playing on this little budget combo. Moving on to GTA 5, and as we saw before, this is a title where the G4560 does hold back the 1050 Ti in certain conditions. If you're just driving around though in normal conditions, you should have a fairly good experience, mostly around that 70 FPS mark. In population dense areas though, you can expect that to choke up a little and slow down to around 50 FPS. Still though, we are playing at high settings here, and the experience was fairly solid except where the G4560 was at 100%. The most demanding title in the benchmark stack is definitely Witcher 3. Here I did see the Pentium chip slow down a little in really demanding conditions. For example, riding past several NPCs who were trying to engage in conversations, and also when fights broke out. At medium settings in 1080p, we're seeing an average of 53 FPS with 1% and 0.1% of frames at 39 and 22 respectively. If this is a game that you want to play above 60 FPS consistently, then consider turning down the settings to low or investing a little bit more money into the CPU and GPU. Battlefield 1 multiplayer, as you guys know, is quite demanding on the CPU, and here the Pentium G4560 did touch on 100% utilization a few times. At high settings though, we are able to play at an average of 59 FPS with the lowest 1% and 0.1% of frames coming in at 38 and 25 FPS respectively. So yeah, we are struggling a little here, and I do blame the G4560 for those poor 1% and 0.1% results. Without a doubt, with more cores and threads available, you'd see those numbers improve quite a bit. In Overwatch, we're seeing an average of 89 FPS, which was quite impressive, and do note that we are playing at ultra settings here. You could easily see that number increase to 120 FPS and above if you're prepared to drop the settings down to medium or low. Here, the experience was really solid. The 0.1% result at 38 FPS is falling quite far behind though, but do remember that this is 0.1%, meaning one frame in every 1,000. If you watch the frame rate graph on the right, you can see it occasionally drop below 50, but it's virtually impossible to notice. Seeing as the bottom 1% of frames is above that 60 FPS mark, we are getting a pretty smooth experience here. Far Cry Primal, similar to Witcher 3, did prove to be quite demanding for this budget duo, and here we need to drop the settings down to normal just to play above 60 FPS. Still though, I'd say this game looks fairly impressive even at normal settings, as high quality textures are still retained. Prey shows us a fairly solid experience again at ultra settings above 60 FPS. The G4560 is definitely capable here, seeing as it's single player with some basic simulation going on in addition. The 0.1% result again is falling quite short, but the 1% of frames are still coming in strong at 47. This is ongoing throughout the benchmarks, and as I mentioned to you guys previously, the Pentium G4560 is responsible for that 0.1% result. So, stuttery mess or console killer? Well, after benchmarking, I did spend quite a few hours with the 1050 Ti and G4560 in my primary gaming machine, and I honestly gamed quite happily at 1080p. And this is coming from me, someone who usually plays at 100 FPS on an ultra-wide monitor. When the Pentium processor and the GTX 1050 Ti are paired, sure, you do see the modest G4560 at 100% usage in very demanding conditions, but these events are few and far between. Obviously though, more cores and threads would result in better scaling, but it's just up to you guys whether you want to spend that extra cash. And lastly, is this the ultimate console killer combination? Well, I'll have to let you guys decide on that one, seeing as we all have our opinions on that conversation. As the benchmarks show, we are getting much better performance than what non-4K consoles currently offer, but given the parts list that I included above, you're also paying a little bit extra as well. Let me know what you guys think. I know there's plenty of you out there who are actually pairing these exact two devices together and are having a great time gaming at 1080p. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, like the video to show your support, and I'll see you all in the next video.